Um, it will be available on YouTube later. So I am going to turn it over to Leyla. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. As she said, my name is Leyla, and this is my eldest daughter, Sam. Sam's area of expertise is amphibians, so she's here with one of her toads. So we'll be covering the benefits of old and cold-blooded pets. So typically these guys are not thought of as being super cute and cuddly by a lot of people. They're not exactly the go-to pet for so many people, and they're kind of in the creepy crawly category, I guess. But I think they're a great pet. In fact, my vet actually recommends these guys for starter pets for children because there's not a whole lot of there's responsibility, but it's not as intense as with mammals. So it's different. But we're going to kind of talk about some of the benefits. We'll talk about some of the negatives too. We have some snakes here. We have a toad who is trying to escape. We have a tortoise. So we're going to kind of like cover everything. We don't have lizards, but the good news is when you're talking about reptiles and amphibians, they all kind of have a lot of the same similarities going on there. There's just little bitty things as you go through it. I always recommend that whenever you're getting into a new pet, you should always research that individual pet just because everyone's a little bit different. I've got 15 snakes, 6 of them are different species, and all those different species have different requirements. Some require extra heat, some don't require extra heat, some need special lighting, some need high humidity. So it just depends on the animal. And I always recommend that you kind of I don't recommend asking pet stores for advice on how to take care of pets. That's why I say kind of do your individual research, just because always remember the places like PetSmart and Petco are there to like sell product. So sometimes they don't have the most current up-to-date information on proper pet care. So I recommend looking into Reptiles Magazine. They have a great website, and they have a ton of care sheets for every kind of reptile and amphibian out there. So definitely that's what I recommend looking into so you get the best information out there. So this is a ball python. This is my very first ball python. This is Persephone. So she is quite a large girl. She's turns 10 this year. So I've had her for all 10 years of her life. So she is my little rock star of a snake that does this with me. She's been doing it forever, and she kind of knows the drill. So most snakes are very head shy, but she's not as head shy as most snakes are. So she's just really great. I personally, I have the question of how do I know she's a girl? Well, that's kind of interesting. You actually, sometimes if you get a snake from a reputable breeder, they will go ahead and find out for you. There's different ways they do it. One way is called popping, where they actually roll the tail back to expose their organs, so you can tell if it's a boy or girl. You really should only do that when they're a baby, and only if you know what you're doing, because you could actually hurt them if you don't know what you're doing. The best way is to probe them, and there's a probe that actually goes into their cloaca here in the back, and depending on how deep the probe goes tells you whether or not you're dealing with a male or a female. I always recommend having that done by a skilled veterinarian who specializes in reptiles and knows what they're doing, because again, it's one of those things, if you don't know what you're doing, you can actually hurt the animal, and it's usually best to handle it that way. Also, female snakes are typically much bigger than male snakes. So male snakes usually will cap out, for this species, they'll cap out around 4 feet. Females can go all the way up to 6 feet. So, and snakes live a long time. So this is one of the other reasons I kind of like having the cold-blooded animals. They all live for a long time. My tortoise here could live to be over 40 years old, which is nothing for a tortoise. Most snakes live up to be 20, 25 years old, depending on the snake. The oldest snake actually in captivity is a ball python, and she's over 50 years old. So they can go a long time if they have the proper care. And toads, what do toads
and frogs tend to live anywhere from like 10, 12, 15 years, depending on how well they are taken care of and if they're in captivity or in the wild.
Yeah, so same thing. So they're kind of nice, since most people think of like a starter pet as like a hamster or a gerbil, and those usually don't have a really long lifespan. As great as they are, we get attached to them, and then unfortunately they don't stick around very long. So this is kind of the nice thing with these guys is if you take care of them really well, they'll kind of live quite a while. Actually, sometimes they'll outlive your dog or your cat. So yeah, kind of so she's kind of mid-aged. She's 10, so she's like right smack in the middle there. There's no reason why she can't live longer than that. And I just got attacked by a toad. So anything can will happen during these things. So definitely let's talk a little bit. Do you want to talk about toads first, since Toby is on a mission to get out of here? So we actually are going to have her talk a little bit about amphibians first, because amphibians are a little bit more special in that they absolutely need to have a water source nearby. So we don't want Toby to dry out on us today. So she's going to talk about it a little bit.
Okay, so he's very excited. If you take, all right.
So there you go.
This is Toby. He's a Fowler's toad, which means he is native to Ohio and North America. All right, we're gonna set you down for just a second there, bud. And because he's a toad, he is slightly different than frogs and lizards and newts and salamanders and things like that. Because he's native to North America, most things are native here to like Ohio per se. They use moderate humidity and temperature, which means just a little bit hotter than us, but they still need a lot of humidity because amphibians are land and water animals, which means that they need a lot of water to survive. And if they don't have that water, they will die, but they can still live on the land. And this thing is attacking me. How did you get a toad for a pet? Did you find him outside?
Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
First of all, here's a disclaimer. It's a little hypocritical. You probably should not go outside and take an animal you find outside. However, yes, both of my toads, Todd and Toby, are from outside.
They're asking why Toby has a weight problem.
He is very fat.
Yes, Toby and Todd eat very well.
Now toads do tend to be a lot chunkier than frogs, unless you're looking at like a dumpy frog, which tend to get really fat, or Pac-Mans, which also do. But that's just normal for them. That's just
They'll also puff up whenever they're a little upset about things, which they're not happy right now.
I have one toad. Her name is her name is Todd, and she's in there. And the reason I'm not showing her is because she gets very angry very quickly. She hates being handled. She'll jump out of your hand. She'll go to the bathroom all over you. Why am I wearing gloves? Oh, that's a fantastic question. So because amphibians are amphibians, they typically drink their water through their skin, which means their skin absorbs just about everything. And our skin has some oils on it that can be really harmful to them and can just make them really sick. So I'm wearing gloves because I don't want my toads to get sick, because they are amphibians and they will absorb all of those oils. And sometimes our oils can even dry them out a little bit, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it also kind of does. So whenever you're handling an amphibian, it's best to wear gloves so that way you don't get them sick. Unless, you're in an emergency situation, then you can just kind of go with it. But immediately you're going to want to clean your hands and make sure everything's all, sanitized.
And for that reason, she only uses distilled water in their enclosure. They don't get tap water because we have a lot of chlorine and other things in our water.
Yes, amphibians in our water that we drink, there's things like fluoride and chlorine that help us keep us safe, and they can even keep us from getting cavities. But for them, that's not safe for them because it's chemicals. So if you are getting into their favorite brand of water,
whatever I bought that week.
I try to use water bottles. I have a lot of purified water bottles.
We use mostly purified water
because purified water is better. Anyways, but spring water is great too. Stop. Don't. In some cases, might even be better because purified water has a lot of stuff added to it. He keeps trying to jump out of my hand. I'm sorry, he's very distracted. But if you are in an emergency situation where you need to use tap water, you can use this stuff
The stuff that you
For
use
fish.
to basically dechlorinate water for your fish will work the same. So we've done that in a pinch as well. He's in a hurry. You should talk about what he eats.
Okay. Amphibians tend to eat a lot of gut-loaded insects, and they usually eat them whole because not a lot of them really have teeth. He doesn't. Pac-Man frogs, I'm pretty sure lizards sometimes. Yeah, do too. And what that means is like crickets, superworms, mealworms, basically anything you really don't want to touch because it's all gross. But that's why we have tongs. What makes this worm super?
Oh, they're just called superworms. They're really big. They're kind of terrifying. I'm not gonna lie.
I fell on the floor and I started crying. I couldn't handle it. I'm scared of them.
They're very like they move real quick. They're kind of, if you go to the store over where they sell like crickets and stuff like that, they will have like superworms. Sometimes they have roaches, sometimes they have crickets. So we don't typically feed superworms. That's usually more for like lizards and stuff, just because they have a lot of protein in them. We don't like to deal with them personally.
No.
And this time of year too, if I'm working in my garden, they get grub worms just for fun.
That's a superworm.
They're scary.
They're big and they have a lot of legs and they're horrible.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
So.
And if they dig down in the dirt,
and they can eat earthworms too.
Yes, but
they'll
typically
eat slugs.
the bigger ones, because frogs. Stop. Most frogs, Pac-Man frogs have teeth. This is not a Pac-Man frog. Do not have teeth, and they have to swallow things whole and just like digest them whole. Which means if it's eating a worm or a super worm or whatever you're feeding it, it can't be too big. It still has to fit in its mouth. Because I have to. Oh my God.
Todd is escaping. Oh. So we have massive chaos here with our toads.
I think Toby's going to go back in his box.
Yeah, so we're going to put the toads up. And it's a common myth that toads will give you awards. That is not even the case. We would have so many awards by now. I've
actually never heard that.
I've heard it's an old wives' tale. So yeah, they don't give you anything at all. And it's kind of funny because one of the hard parts about owning any of these guys at all is that they really don't have facial expressions. So I think that's why it's hard for some humans to kind of identify with them. They kind of feel like they're not a real animal. I've heard that before from some people. And they do though have their individual personalities. We will testify that, like she said, Todd does not like being handled at all, and Toby had his limit there apparently.
Tolerance.
Every one of our snakes has an individual personality. They have like things. We have one snake that wants its food delivered on a plate. So it's really weird how that works, but you kind of figure out what they all individually like, and you kind of work around that. And some snakes like to do this, others do not, and they just kind of live a cushy life in their enclosures. Anything else about them?
And then I forgot because my toes were escaping. All right. We are a lot bigger than these animals. That's very obvious, and we're also kind of natural predators. Well, to them, it looks like it. You wouldn't want to eat a toad if you just found it on the ground. Some people would, but they probably want to cook it first. Anyways, no. So they're really scared of us. No. And if you go near one, it's probably gonna jump away. And if you see a frog, a toad, a lizard, really a snake too, in the wild, you should probably just leave it alone. It's living its best life.
Kind of a fun fact though about toads, and do frogs do this too? I don't know, but when they're excited about eating, they'll twitch their toes.
Oh yeah,
their toes will twitch, and they kind of it's very cute.
Oh, I just remembered what I was gonna say. Whenever toads and frogs feel threatened, they will secrete this like super gross stuff from their skin, and it's toxic if you eat it, which is why I don't eat it, obviously. But that's when they feel really threatened, like it's a life or death situation. I have some pretty dramatic. All toads toxic, and they all have something that they use to defend themselves. There is a toad called the Colorado River toad that is especially toxic, and it can even hurt you just by touching it. I know this stuff. I really love frogs, and I'm trying to get more and more every day, so I research them 24/7. My dad, however, is not a big fan of that. But no, so that's one of their big defense mechanisms. I'm sorry, my throat is dry.
Do they need big enclosures?
They need big. Oh, I love this question. Okay, so if you're having a tree frog, there's all these different ones. So tree frogs need a lot more like things that go upwards, and they're gonna need branches and things to climb on, and a lot of humidity. Now, most frogs you can cohabitat with each other, but if depending on what you're getting, you might need something a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger. A Pac-Man frog can only be by itself because they do have teeth and they're kind of vicious. Typically nothing any smaller than a 10-gallon. My guys right here, I have 2 of them and they can be a 10-gallon. So yeah, I lost my train of thought. Depending on what you're getting, really, though, you should research how big its habitat needs to be. If it's anything that climbs, though, it immediately needs something bigger that goes upwards and is not very horizontal at all, because they climb, and that's what they love to do. But typically, yeah, something a little bit bigger, but they're great, especially if you want something that's good as a display animal that people can look at. They're amazing for that because they're just so like cute.
And there's some really pretty frogs out there too. But yeah, to the point about, the toxicness of them, you need to definitely do your research, but a lot of them are toxic, especially if you have a dog or a cat in the house and your toad were to get loose or you were out playing with them, you can put them away.
I'm gonna go put them away because again, they need a lot of humidity and their thing has humidity.
That's why they went first. But if you were to have your toad out playing about and a dog came and got it, they probably are going to have a reaction to it. They'll probably foam at the mouth a lot because again, they have that toxic on the toxic stuff that comes out of skin, but it's not going to really bug us as much. The toads have not bit her. They don't really bite. They just kind of hop at you more or less, but they more or less, when they feel threatened, they kind of blow up a little bit more just to make themselves look bigger. And that's kind of their, do they make noises? So funny story, those are actually both females. We call the one a male just because we do. But males will make noises. Now with frogs, it depends. Some males and females will both make noises, but with toads, typically you can tell if they're male or female by picking them up, and if they make a little noise, it's a boy, and if they don't make any noises, it's a girl. So kind of funny if you ever check out I'm blanking on the name. I think it's called Snake Encounter or whatever on YouTube. She goes through a whole thing on how you can tell if you're a frog or a toad or male or female. And frogs, you can always tell if they're male or female by they have a little ear area. It's like a little, yes, Emily. But they have this, what is it called? Their ear, it's an ocular or something.
Oh, shoot, I don't remember.
But it's where their ear basically is like a circle near their eyes. If the circle is bigger than the eye, it's a male. If it's the same size or smaller, it's a female. So
on toads, if you look at their throats, you can figure out if they're a male or female. Now, if it's opaque, which means you cannot see through it at all, that means it's a girl. But if you can kind of see blue lines and veins and like it's kind of transparent, that's a boy. Also, they're loud, as she previously said, so that's kind of a giveaway.
Okay, yeah, they're talking about snake discovery.
Can I go get...
All right, go ahead. All right, so let's move on to snakes because I've got a few of those. Snakes, there's a whole bunch of them out there. There's, almost 3,000 different species of snakes in the world. Obviously, not all of them are going to be ideal as a pet. The good news is there's a lot of them that are great as pets. Like I said, I have 6 different species. I've worked with, I think, up to 9 or 10 of them at this point in my house. I used to do rescue work with some of them, so that was what I did. But they're kind of great. I personally love the ball python as a starter snake. Now, we have what we call starter snakes, which are snakes that are very easy to manage. They don't have super high demands. They're not complicated to keep. They don't require, you got him. I feel like she got the baby. So they don't,
He's not really a baby anymore.
he is. He's a baby forever. So they're just really, I prefer the ball pythons because they're kind of like I call them the couch snake. They kind of curl up with you and snuggle with you on the couch. They're a nice size. The only negative to a ball python is sometimes they can be finicky eaters. Now another great starter snake is the corn snake. We don't actually have any corn snakes here. We have the closest thing, which is a milk snake. They kind of all fit in that king snake, milk snake,
He's in
corn
a
snake.
shed, though, I think.
Is he?
No.
Oh yeah,
no.
my milk snake. My milk snake's in a shed. Otherwise,
So
he would totally be here because he's
yeah.
really cool. But yeah, and we don't handle our snakes much in a shed. It's kind of a cranky time for them because their skin's kind of separating. So sometimes they can be a little ouchy, and their vision's really hard to see through because they get really hazy looking and everything. So we have a bunch of them in a shed right now. So sometimes that determines who gets to work on the day. We're going, I'm like, oh no, you're in a shed. That's not going to work out well. So another nice benefit of ball pythons is they have a lot of different variety. So this is Rebel. He is the same species of snake as Persephone. The only difference is he's what we call piebald. And then Sam has Artax, same species of snake, but again, he's a little bit different. He's what we call a blue-eyed leucistic. So he's got blue eyes and he's all white. So nope, they're not related. None of them are related.
It looks like it.
Yeah, it kind of looks like it. Yeah, we kind of got together there, but nope, they're all different. And they've actually, yeah, she's laid eggs once, but they never actually hatched. So
There was
we
a
never did.
power outage thing, right?
Yeah, we had a power outage issues.
And it was
So
the incubator.
can snakes tell the difference between? Yes, they can. So it's kind of cool because snakes don't have really good vision. They don't hear like we hear. They don't actually have ears. They have an inner ear, and they actually pick up vibrations with their jawbone. So we emit different vibrations. Our heart rate, how we breathe is different. Like right now, she's definitely picking up on the intonations in my voice for sure. And obviously we smell differently. And anytime that tongue's shooting out, they're sniffing the air around them. So they know they're people. And yes, they absolutely prefer different people. A couple of my snakes are now her snakes because they don't particularly, it's not they don't like me, but they prefer her over me. So it's like, it's yours now, fine, whatever. I mean, they're all in the same place anyway.
They all are in sheds too. So
And they're all in sheds right now. But yeah, they do figure out. And when I'm actually face to face with students in the classroom, I've set a snake down on the ground and they will first start to venture out to explore, but then they pick up on the unusual vibrations in the room and they'll go right back to me because they know I'm at least secure. I'm not going to eat them. I've yet to eat them, so it's a good day. So can you eat a snake egg like a chicken egg? I don't think you would want to. They're completely different. I don't even know how you would break them open. Their eggs are actually very leathery and soft, so they're not like a regular chicken egg is. But weirdly enough, if you know what you're doing, you can use a chicken egg incubator to incubate snake eggs. So yeah, that's true. So yeah, I don't know if you'd really want to. I personally wouldn't go there, but that's a good question. That's the first time I've got that question too.
Yeah,
So.
same. I've heard can you eat snakes, but not snake eggs.
So the number one question I get keeping snakes is, do your snakes bite you? In the 10 plus years I've worked with snakes, I've been bitten twice by my snakes, and the same snake. And she was a rescue. She didn't trust people at all. It was more of she was just very jumpy sort of thing. So snakes don't really want to bite us. It's, not to their benefit to bite us at all. The only case that they're really going to bite you if they feel threatened or if they confuse you with food, which, people I know who've gotten bit by snakes, it's usually because they were holding the food with like their hands versus using tongs, or they just weren't paying attention when they were feeding. So usually it's just and usually once the snake bites the person, they're like, oh, I made a mistake, and they let go. And they're like, feel kind of. And my one friend who keeps getting bit because she refuses to use tongs, she said it's almost like the snake's embarrassed afterwards, and they kind of like. Her one snake actually wouldn't even come out for like a couple weeks after she bit her because it was just kind of a weird thing that had never happened before. So in general, though, they usually don't want to bite you. I rarely have them striking at me. And it's like any animal, you just kind of learn how to read their body language. They're a little bit harder to figure out, not like a dog or a cat, because obviously they don't have those facial expressions or like that. A lot of people tend to mistake just any kind of like S form on a snake as a strike position, but that's not usually the case. It's especially with these guys, they just tend to curl up a lot and they like to be like little pet rocks. That's kind of their thing. But in general, they'll usually kind of offer some sort of posturing. In general, they'll kind of puff themselves up a little bit more. And you know, they don't always hiss. Hissing isn't always an indicator that they're in a bad mood. We have a couple snakes who just like to hiss for fun, and that's what they do. Our hognose, we didn't bring her out because we had the toads. Hognose is naturally eat toads, but she's very hissy, and you know, she likes to puff herself up for fun because she's just dramatic about everything. So, but if she struck at us, it would be with her mouth closed. So that's kind of the funny thing about her. Do snakes play with toys? No, they do not play with toys.
They might curl up with it in it inside of
They
it.
like to get stuck in stuff a lot. I don't know if that's the same thing.
No, snakes, you might see people giving their snakes like tubes to play with.
Yeah.
They're not really playing with it. Snakes naturally need something that's more like tight to feel secure and safe. Like their hides are typically a little small, so that way they can feel safer. And they're just really using that tube as a safety space.
Also, we do like to make sure all of our animals have something we call enrichment, which means it's something for them to do. So they're not just like sitting in there with nothing to do. So I've recently dumped a lot of money into redoing all their enclosures. So they have like vines and rocks and all sorts of stuff to do. Some people will give their snakes those, if you've ever seen them at PetSmart, they're like balls for dogs, but they have like the little holes in them for like treats. But they're big enough for a snake to crawl through. They'll give them to those so they can kind of wind themselves around. Of course, they usually get tangled in there and like, how do I get my snake out? But that's why I don't give those things to them, because they will get caught in there. They do get themselves into a lot of trouble all the time. They're very curious. One of our snakes is a notorious escape artist, and he's with me today. And this is Panko. Now, not all snakes are huge. So we pull him out. He's a Kenyan sand boa. And he's cool. He's sitting down here.
Oh.
And he's about full size for a male. Now the females are bigger, not huge, but they're still bigger than him. He is my escape artist. He was missing for like 4 days, and it was a big ordeal. Trying to find a tiny snake in your house.
And that was when he was about the size of
and he was a baby. So that was super fun. I had to tear apart my whole house. But yeah, trying to find a tiny snake is hard. Finding a bigger snake, much easier. I'm actually okay when the 7-footer gets out, because we'll eventually find him. This one's a little bit harder to find.
Also,
so
he knocks down everything.
That is true. He does like to knock everything down. And they're very smart. He knows how his lid works. So he knows that his lid slides off. If we didn't have a lock on his lid, he would slide it off all the time and escape, because he will actually go and stick his nose under it. And I've watched him do it. So usually if you hear something going on in the living room, it's because Panko is trying to escape yet again. So it's kind of what they do. Can snakes and toads and tortoises get along with other pets like cats and dogs? So they're linked up now. We don't recommend it. My dog has grown up with them. They were here before he was, so he knows the rules. He's also super well trained, so he knows the snakes are off limits. He knows that he will herd the tortoises for me when they're in the backyard. So he will go lay down in front of them to keep them from getting into trouble, because tortoises are a massive escape artist as well. We'll hit that when we get to her.
And they're stubborn. And
they're very stubborn. But again, I know him well enough to know what he'll do and when he won't. Cats in general, and cats you kind of have to watch, because they're attracted to the heat lamps and stuff like that come with these kind of animals. There's a lot of tortoise owners will have issues with cats going in and kind of laying down in the tortoise enclosure and getting involved there. And in general, most keepers will tell you that's a bad idea, especially since cat scratches can be really bad for any of these guys. And dogs also can do a lot of damage as well if they really want to. So in general, we try to keep them away from we try to keep them away from each other too, because snakes, most reptiles are solitary creatures, which means they don't actually like having friends. So yeah, they're linked up right now, but it's more or less just one of them went through the other one. They really don't want to hang out with each other. Every snake has their own cage. So that's 15 cages in my living room for sure. And the tortoises each have their own cage because as soon as they're in the same space together, they go after each other to bite each other's feet. The toads get along great, so that's a win there. Everything else is like, I need my own space. So in general, like I said, I try to keep everything separate because I don't like vet visits as a general rule of thumb, and it gets pricey real quick. And that's another thing with these guys, you absolutely need to have access to an exotic vet, which if you live in Ohio, there's quite a few around. So it's usually not a big issue to find one. You just kind of got to look around a little bit. Do snakes need big cages? Depends on the snake. So he's in a smaller cage because, to be very honest with you, he is a burrowing snake. So we don't actually see him very often. He's usually under the ground. In fact, he was sitting here waiting his turn and I had to give him a bunch of bedding so he could burrow underneath it. They spend more time there. So he's not in a huge cage. My other burrowing snake, my rosy boa, who is very small as well, she also has a very small cage. But then I have some snakes like my 7-foot long Brazilian rainbow boa who has a really tall arboreal cage. These guys mostly have 3-foot long cages that go about 20 inches deep. So they don't need especially some of these guys don't need a lot of space upwards. It just depends on the snake. Some snakes are more what we call ground snakes, where they like to stretch out more on the ground and explore in the ground. Others are what we call arboreal species, where they like to climb. So in that case, it's like the frogs, where you need to kind of know what they prefer to do so you can have the right more height versus more ground space. And they're very squirmy over here. So yeah, and some snakes, depending on how involved you do get into snake keeping, we might need like water access, more so than like their water dish. And they're all silly.
Except for Persephone,
Persephone knows her job. She's the only snake who knows her job. Everyone else is going chaotic over here. But you need to be aware that you may not have one cage. So like, for example, my black milk snake, he's a baby right now. So he has a nice size cage, but it's not huge. You don't want to get too big because snakes can feel very uncomfortable if they feel like exposed too much. So you usually need a lot of clutter in there. So lots of logs and rocks and hides and things to get underneath, so they feel more secure. And with babies specifically, we usually try to keep their cages a little bit smaller, but as they get bigger, they're going to need bigger cages. So one day my black milk snake will be 7 feet long. And in that point in time, he's going to need a much bigger cage. So you just kind of have to adjust as you go through it. That's probably why I have so many snakes, is as one sizes up, I'm like, hey, I have a space for another one. Let's get another one. So, and they're really easy to take care of. You can't ask for a better animal for if you go out of town a lot. So we show horses in the summer. So we're out of town a lot of weekends, which means I need somebody watching a lot of my pets. But I don't need anyone really watching these guys, because basically I just feed them before I go out of town, give them a bowl of water and set their lights, and I'm good to go. So they're pretty easy, low maintenance animals. You don't need to take them for walks. They don't need a lot of interaction. So if you're really busy one week, it's not a big deal. They don't really care one way or another. When they're out, they're fine. Most snakes are very fine with tolerating attention. As you can tell, they're all just like, okay, we'll just hang out on her today. That's not a big deal. And they're really laid back about being handled for the most part. Of course, they're all individuals. You will have snakes that just don't want to be handled in general. Our Brazilian rainbow boa, he's 18 years old. He's an old man. So we kind of just like let him do his thing in there, and we just clean his messes up and feed him whenever he's hungry. So that's just kind of how that works. But most of them will just kind of do their own thing until you get them out, and then they're usually pretty chill with it. So as far as the biggest negative for a lot of people is feeding snakes, they really have a hard time with you're going to have to feed them whole prey, which is usually a rodent of some sort. all of my snakes eat frozen thawed. So I buy their food already deceased and it's frozen. I just have to thaw it out in a bowl. And actually, I don't even like wave it around anymore. I just like deposit it in there and let him go for the night. And then I come back in the morning and whoever didn't eat, I just get rid of it. Like I said, they're really horrible predators.
Artax eats his on a plate.
Yeah, Artax is the one who eats it on
I
the
gotta get
plate,
him
the
out.
little white one we had here a minute ago.
Keeps running around. So.
And
not running, he's on legs.
Yeah, and the males will go off feed in the winter time because they're thinking about finding a girlfriend. You know, the in general, some of them get kind of finicky about things now and then, but yeah, they're not great predators. Everyone's always like, oh my gosh, they eat all the time. I'm like, no, they don't.
He needs to be put in a separate container with a towel over him because
he doesn't want people watching him eat.
He's so weird.
We have a snake that will actually wait for you to leave the room before they start to eat.
And he's in our living room, which is kind of inconvenient.
So I'm like, just no one go near the room. Cupid's trying to eat right now. And it's just how they are. They're all kind of weird about it. They all have their individual things. We have one snake, he only wants white rats. He will not eat a rat that's gray or dark colored.
My other snake, she like sits on her hide and like stares at you, but then will take like an hour to even eat.
So they're all kind of weird. So no one eats normal around here. So yeah, kind of an interesting fun fact about snakes is they're just like not as voracious as people kind of think that they are. So
depending on the size. So when they're younger, they need to eat a lot more often, but when they're older, they really don't. Whenever they're fresh, it's like usually once every week.
5 days actually. Babies will eat once every 5 days, and then as they get to his level now, he was hatched out in September or August.
He was about the same time as Update.
Yeah, and he's not super old. He's under a year, but he eats right now about once a week. He eats once every couple weeks. She eats once every 3 weeks. So it just depends. We used to keep short-tailed pythons. They get overweight really easily. So those guys you feed like once a month. What do babies eat? Babies eat baby animals, unfortunately. So baby snake, baby food. So they do eat like little pinkies or fuzzies. He actually eats rat pups, so they're a little bit bigger. He's probably almost getting to a size where he could eat something a little bit bigger. We typically will weigh your snakes. Every snake's a little bit different, so you kind of, but the rule of thumb that we like to follow is the mid-size of a snake. They can eat something the size of their midpoint. I know it seems crazy, especially like with little heads like this guy here, where the head is so wee and tiny, but you would be amazed what they can get down sometimes. It's kind of impressive. How do you know if a snake is fat? They'll get like little fat wrinkles actually on them when they turn around like this. You'll see like little fat wrinkles on them. You typically want to kind of be able to see where their spine is at. Jenny Craig for snakes. I love it. Yeah, you just kind of gotta there are some species of snakes that will just like eat and eat and eat and eat, not ball pythons usually, but a lot of them will. And you have to watch it because it puts a lot of pressure on their lungs. So it's not actually good for them to have that going on. So here, hold him for a minute. And so, yeah. All right, I'm going to move on to tortoises because we're never going to get to her otherwise. And she is like trying to escape. So Katya is a Russian tortoise. And here she is in all her tortoise glory. They're not a super huge tortoise. They're actually quite easy to work with. We know it's a girl before one asks because she has a tiny little tail. Males usually have a longer tail and it usually curls around. So females are kind of easy to find because they have the little bitty tail there. And females, again, just like males, are usually a little bit bigger than the males. So if you put her up next to a male, she'd be a little bit bigger.
My friend has 2 males and we have 2 females, and she's always talking about how hers look like they're 7 years younger than
They
her.
do. They're so tiny compared to
them. So small. They can fit in your hand. They're cute though.
So tortoises are kind of a great option if you're a little weird about feeding off, because obviously we've had the toads, we have to feed them bugs. We've had the snakes, you have to feed them rodents. These guys are kind of great because with the tortoise, they are vegetarians. So they eat nothing but vegetables or, some eat fruit. everyone's a little different. Again, that's why I said always research what you're getting yourself into. But these guys specifically will eat greens. I love them because they eat dandelions. So I will actually take my tortoises out in my yard in the springtime and let them feast on the weeds in the yard. They love dandelions and broadleaf plantains. So they actually will de-weed my garden for me if I let them go do it. They also have a sweet tooth now and then. She gets a strawberry now and then as a treat, or sometimes she goes and raids my neighbor's tomatoes whenever I'm not paying full attention to her. They are fast. A lot of people think of tortoises as being very slow and kind of easy to, you're like, how hard is it to keep track of your tortoises, Leyla? You would be surprised. In 20 minutes, one day I went inside to grab a salad and came back outside, and she had managed to escape her little playpen and escape our yard and go to my neighbor's yard and start raiding her tomato plants. So it took two of us to go find her. So it was a very exciting day there. But yeah, she is definitely, they can climb too. One of my people from one of my tortoise groups posted a picture of theirs climbing their drain pipe. So they are really good climbers. Yeah, so we had put pipe cleaners on ours before, but you can put them. I'm just really weird about putting anything sticky on her because their shells are very they're part of their skeleton. So I have this, and you can actually see where their spine is actually attached to their shell. This is a snapping tortoise or snapping turtle shell.
Tortoise.
Yeah. So.
No, but I do have a friend who has a balloon. It's very bright. It says "I love you" on it. That she puts on her tortoises so they can run around her yard.
But that's a very common thing to do, is kind of put something so you can keep a track of them. I know some people who also get the little GPS trackers and put them on their tortoises because they're just that bad about getting out, and they're really good diggers. And they just kind of get into trouble all the time.
And they're really stubborn. So if a tortoise is like saying going towards the gate, and you pick it up and you move it or turn it facing the other direction, it'll just go right back to where it was going.
So if you ever find a turtle or a tortoise trying to cross the road, you should always just move them in the direction they were going, because they're just going to turn right back around and go the place they were going originally. They're very stubborn animals. Kind of a fun fact. Tortoises actually drink out of their cloacas back here, so they actually need to get soaked now and then. They get a lot of their moisture from their veggies and stuff. Well, they eat mostly greens, so they get a lot of their moisture content from that, but they also will need a soak now and then to kind of keep them nice and hydrated. So the best way to pick up a turtle or a tortoise is you kind of hold them like a hamburger is the best way to do it. And you kind of like hold them like that. Persephone is very interested in Katya right now. Yeah, you just hold them like a hamburger. Now they do have sharp claws, so you kind of have to watch that a little bit there. If you are dealing with they're all like drama queens. If you're dealing with obviously something a little bit bigger like a snapping turtle, that's a whole different ball game. I usually recommend well, yeah, you don't want to touch them if at all possible. But if you have to, you can grab them like right behind the back of the shell and in the back, because again, they have a really long bite radius. So typically I try to scooch the snappers across the road versus having to pick them up, because they can they're not as thankful for the help usually.
It's also very common for people to want to save snappers by putting them in the backseat of their car.
Don't do that. They're great at climbing.
They climb up and they like jump scare you.
Yeah. So, but they have beaks. In general, she's never tried to bite me. No. And sometimes their beaks get really long.
She chases me around the house though.
We get the things that the birds sharpen or de-sharpen their beaks on. The calcium blocks. There we go. Or you can get a piece of slate and feed their food to them on that, and that'll kind of help keep their beaks filed down a little bit there. They don't require a lot of maintenance, but that's one of the things you kind of got to watch with them. Or if they get really long, or you get one that's been, a lot of them are rescues in general, but you can go to the vet and get that trimmed as well by a professional. I would have it professionally done just because there's a lot of nerves in there. So, but this is an animal that you keep by itself. If you get a turtle, they are going to have to eat, they're omnivorous. So they do eat some fish or whatever. And usually turtles are going to need access to a water source as well, but they definitely do need heat. They all need heat. Oh, these guys require UVB lights as well. So that's one of the reasons that during the warmer months, I like to take them outside. You can't beat the sunshine with them. They get natural UVB rays that way. If not, they're going to need it indoors during the winter time. But I don't keep them in tanks. A lot of people think that whenever they see a reptile, it instantly has to go in a tank, and that's not always the best idea. These guys are they roam in their natural environment so much that whenever they have a clear space, they get confused and they're always going to try to get through that. So you want something that's opaque. So they sell wooden tortoise enclosures. Those are like the best things ever for these guys because they can't see out. They have plenty of room to wander around. There's a little area they can hide in. So it works really great. So where do you buy a tortoise? In general, my two are rescues. So both of them came from rescue organizations. I always recommend starting there because tortoises, unfortunately, are rehomed a lot because of the longevity of how long they live. Like I said, she can live 40 plus years easily. Sulcatas are huge. First of all, if you do not know what you're doing, do not jump right into a sulcata. Yeah, they'll go through a wall if they're really bored. So they're like tanks. So, but there are reptile rescues throughout everywhere. Sometimes you got to dig around a little bit for them, but they are in existence. Another thing you could do is get a reputable breeder. There's reptile shows. There's also Morph Market. They'll have to be shipped by mail, but that actually does work fine. I've had plenty of my animals shipped by FedEx. It's a little nerve-wracking, but it does work out. But yeah, we do have in Ohio, we have the All Ohio Reptile Show where you'll have a lot of breeders there. So you can absolutely get any of these animals there. And it's kind of nice because you get to talk to the breeder. And that's what I recommend because they know the animal better than anything. They're going to be a healthy animal. They will have had successful feedings, shed cycles, what have you. And it's probably one of the best ways to make sure you're getting a healthy animal and you have a resource for if you have a question. They're there to answer your questions because they want the animal to go to a good home. Are they expensive? This is a great question. So the tortoise wasn't, obviously she's a rescue, so she wasn't very expensive. But if you actually buy a tortoise from a breeder, it's going to be less than $100 for sure.
Unless you buy a bigger one, obviously.
Unless you get like something really big. But in general, tortoises are kind of economical. As far as their food is concerned, she eats pretty much lettuces, greens, weeds. Summertime, she's super economical because I can get dandelions out of my yard and feed that to her. It just racks up a little bit in the wintertime whenever she's just burning through lots of lettuce and stuff. Her light bulbs are probably the worst thing because UVB lights can be really pricey, but in general, she's a pretty cheap animal to have around. She doesn't need a vet very often. She's gone one time. I like to have them wormed in general just to make sure they're okay and to have her beak filed down. So she's pretty cheap. The toads came from the wild, so there was no purchase price there, but you can buy toads obviously through breeders and frogs.
You're gonna want to buy them because if you pick up any animal from the outside of your home or in your neighborhood and it's native to your state or city, you're gonna want to get a permit for that. We're currently working on our permit.
But yeah, and with frogs, most of them are pretty reasonably priced. They range, and usually they sell them in like sets of multiple.
It depends though. If you're wanting like an Amazon milk frog, which are so cute, they're so adorable. They're like black, white, and kind of bluish. Those are typically like $50. Pac-Mans tend to be $20 just because they are pretty popular. But again, things that are smaller and super common and don't really have a lot of people wanting to buy them are usually like $5 if you find the right person. What are you doing?
So snakes, and the toad setup is pretty cheap too. Like I said, simple tank, a lot of natural light for them.
You do want a probe to see the temperature.
Oh yeah.
And
thermostats are your best friend with these guys to make sure everything's going well. Snakes are a little bit different. They range anywhere from $20 to thousands of dollars. The most expensive snake was 50 grand because it was basically the same thing that Rebel was, the black and brown snake, except it was black and white. So it was at the time a very rare snake, so they were asking a premium price. A snake like this, she was $40. Our tax here was $500. Rebel was $500. I mean, they all kind of like range all over the place, just depending on what you want. So yeah. And they've gotten a little bit more as they get more common, the special looking snakes, they decrease in price. That's the nice thing there. So if you wait long enough, because that was my bucket list snake for a long time, so I kind of waited around to get one. But as far as feeding them is concerned, again, the snakes don't eat all the time. They eat maybe once a week or once a month in some cases. So you're not actually spending a lot of money on food all the time. And if you are late on a feeding with these guys, it's not the end of the world. You just hop back in once you know, like if you're like, oh, I'm out of rats, I need to go to the store and get rats. And you go to the store, pick up a frozen rat, come home, and you can feed them 2 days later. It's not a big deal. Their setup, depending on how much effort you want to put into it, can be simple or more complicated. It can really range a lot. So it just kind of depends. But I think in general, compared to especially like dogs and stuff like that, where you have to go in regularly for vaccinations and you have, you know, your dog license and all the other stuff that goes with them, they're a lot less maintenance with them and they're not as expensive. So like, you know, your dog's having to eat every single day, your cat has to eat every day, the horses have to eat every day. So that racks up a little bit quicker than something that eats, you know, once a week maybe. So I think they're a little bit more economical pets for sure. You know, and usually they don't go to the vet as often as a lot of other pets, which does make them kind of a good thing. But whenever you do need an exotic vet, you do need an exotic vet, because unfortunately, once you notice these guys are not feeling so well, they do need to go to the vet at that point, but they usually recover pretty well, especially if you have a good vet. So do I have, and we're like down to like 5 minutes. I know I was like all over the place, but do I have any other questions from anyone out there about these guys? What? Oh, yeah, you can buy frozen rats bulk too. So if you have a snake problem like I do, you can order from places like Big Cheese.
That's a fun.
It's a fun name. Perfect Prey is another one as well, and they'll just ship rats in bulk to your house, and that's how we do it, because we're buying so many rats. It's just honestly better that way.
I have a friend with one snake, and she just gets like 15.
Yeah, and if you have friends with snakes, you can all go in together and pay shipping and handling. It's great. How many times do they shed? It depends. So if you have a baby snake, they're shedding more frequently because they're growing faster. So my black milk snake, who's younger, who I wanted to bring down here, he is always in a shed because he's growing so fast. But she sheds like maybe once every 3 months because she's pretty well grown up. You know, she could grow more, but you know, she's not going to continuously do it. So it just depends on how fast they're growing, because it's basically just like our skin stretches when we grow. Their skin doesn't stretch, so they just need to get a new skin in, so or new scales in. So they basically just are exchanging that out as they grow. Who is my favorite snake? This one.
Not that we don't have favorites.
We don't have favorites, but yeah, she's my first, and she's always going to be my big baby. So she has changed a lot of people's minds on snakes. Probably the hardest part of my job is convincing people that snakes are not as terrifying as most people think they are. And she does a pretty good job of changing minds all the time. So she is like a big puppy dog in a snake form. So
I don't have a personal favorite because I'm not mean like that. Also, all 3 of mine act the exact same way.
They pretty much do, yes. Do you see guys? I do not. She's more on TikTok than I am.
I probably follow them.
She probably follows them.
If I see someone who has reptiles, I immediately follow them.
She's on TikTok more than I am. I'm on Facebook all the time. So
last week I think I had an average of 5 hours on the phone.
That's great. Do we have any other questions?
Hold on, what was it called?
Galaxy Exotics.
Oh, I see it. No, I don't follow them.
She doesn't follow them.
Wait,
so
no,
now
I've seen their videos, but I
but
don't
she's seen
follow
their videos. Okay.
Okay, yes, that's
There's
the
the
person with the hog noses.
Ah, yes, hog noses. Super
I have a
fun.
hog nose.
Yes,
She's ridiculous.
Super ridiculous. All right. So yeah, in general, like I said, I totally recommend looking into cold-blooded pets. Like I said, they're a completely different take on a pet. But another great benefit, probably should mention this, is if you have allergies or you have people in your family with allergies, you don't have to worry about that with these guys. So they're great for people who want to have a pet and have that experience, but they can't have the dog or the cat or the hamster or what have you because of the dander or the dust that comes with their bedding and stuff like that. So this is a great alternative to feeling like you have a pet like anyone else. So, and they're super relaxing. I have her around me. They give you little neck massages and stuff like that. But number one thing also to remember is always keep hand sanitizer around with these guys. Washing your hands is very important with any pet, but especially these guys. Some of them can carry salmonella. It's usually in their poo. So not most people go playing with their poo, but in general, when you're cleaning cages, we usually like to use little rubber gloves, or we just make sure we wash our hands a lot and use hand sanitizer just in case.
I use a scoop because I ain't touching none of them.
We also use scoops around here because we don't exactly like to touch it, but you never know.
They're like these little shovels that have little sifters at the bottom.
They're like little kitty litter scoops.
Essentially, yeah.
So, all right, but those are the main points that I want to make sure that I got in there for sure, because you got to make sure to keep it clean.
That reminds me, if you're getting a reptile or an amphibian of any sort and you are buying stuff from stores for them, you want to make sure you make it so there's no mites, nothing.
Oh yeah,
nothing
that's another
bad
thing to
them
watch out
on there.
for.
So you can put your substrate or whatever it is. I think you can put it in the freezer.
Yeah, you can freeze, or
you can bake your
if you get wood products from pet stores, you can bake it for a little while.
Get plastic, even though it's plastic, you should still clean it off before you put it in there.
Clean everything.
Especially their water dishes, because they will be drinking out of that. So
yeah, just always a good precaution that whenever you get stuff from a pet store, because there are lots of pets usually there, just to kind of keep it clean and make sure you're not giving anything to your pets at all. So
usually you should probably be using natural cleaners on their water dishes, just because, nothing with too many chemicals.
Simple Green is a great product to use with your pets that are a little bit more sensitive. So
toads, I can tell you this for a fact, toads and frogs with their water dishes are absolutely disgusting. I know that tortoises are too.
Tortoises are too.
They poop in them. They get all their substrate in them, and you have to clean it like once a month or once every 2 weeks because they just make it so gross. And it's just yeah.
But in general, these are probably our less stinky animals in the household.
Definitely.
The rats are by far much better. Your sister is not an animal, so all right. Ending on that note.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for introducing us to your slithery and crawly creatures. And thanks everybody that tuned in.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.